It's a good day, everyone, and welcome to this XBRL Directions webinar. I am Catalina Ibanez. I am the chair of the Implementation Awareness Task Force Working Group, and the topic of the webinar from today is currency and country taxonomies. We have today Paul Warrant, Technical Director of XBRL International. So, Paul, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catalina. Yes, I'm Paul Warren. I'm Technical Director at XBRL International, and I oversee the technical developments of our specifications within XBRL International. And recently I have been working with my colleague Revathi on these taxonomies that provide XBRL definitions of a couple of ISO code lists. So before, in today's webinar, I'd like to go over the details of these taxonomies and how they work. But before we do that, let's first just have a little look at the underlying code lists that we are modeling. The code lists that the taxonomies cover are the ISO currency and country code lists. These are maintained by the International Organization for Standards, or ISO, and their use provides consistent codes allowing you to unambiguously identify countries and currencies. So first, let's have a look at an example of the kind of place where this comes up in a business report. And of course, business reports of this kind are increasingly being modeled and reported in XBRL or inline XBRL. This is an example taken from a recent ESEF filing, which discloses shares in subsidiaries, and you can see that there are a couple of columns in this table that make use of both countries and currencies. So for each subsidiary, the filing is reporting the country in which the subsidiary is registered, and also the currency, the functional currency in which that subsidiary operates. So when this report is being modeled in XBRL, we're looking for a standard way to capture that information in order to improve comparability. And one note I'll just make before we move on is that XBRL has required the use of ISO currency codes, ISO 4217 currency codes, whenever you report a monetary value in XBRL. That's been part of the specification since it was first created in 2001. But there are other places where currency codes are used in XBRL reports. This is one example that we can see in front of us, the green box here, where we are actually disclosing what the functional currency of the subsidiary is. That's being reported as would be reported as an XBRL fact value, and that would not currently be covered by the standard XBRL 2.1 requirement to report the units of your facts using ISO 4217 codes. This is probably a good point to move on to the details of how these taxonomies work in XBRL. There's two separate taxonomies, one for the currency codes, one for the country codes. These two code list taxonomies make use of a shared common taxonomy. So there's actually a third taxonomy which is imported by both of them, which just ensures that they handle various properties in a standard ways. These taxonomies are designed to be incorporated into other taxonomies. So if you are a data collector or a standard setter and you're building a taxonomy and you need to make use of currency or country codes, then you can import one of these taxonomies in order to model that in a standard way. And of course, the advantage of doing this is that it gives a consistent approach across different reporting taxonomies. It means that countries and currencies are reported in a consistent way, and it also allows you to remove the maintenance burden of keeping on top of updates in these ISO code lists. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I'd like to talk now a little bit more about how these taxonomies can be used. both these taxonomies are designed to be used in two different ways, depending on what your reporting requirements are. The first situation is where you're actually disclosing a value that needs to use a currency or a country code list. So, for example, where you are reporting the country in which your organization is incorporated, or as per the example we saw previously, where you're disclosing the functional currency of your organization. In that case, you are disclosing a fact value, and that can be done using these code list, using what we call an XBRL and enumeration. Sometimes we call it an extensible enumeration. And what you have there is you have the value of fact, and that's constrained to be one member from this code list. So by using this approach, you ensure data quality by requiring facts to use a value from the code list. The other place that these code lists can be used is as dimensional values. So where you're providing a breakdown of a particular fact by currency or country, you can use the code list value as a dimensional value. So you could report your exposure to a particular currency in this way, or you could report your revenue by country using the country code list, and that would be a dimensional breakdown. And both of these options are supported by the taxonomy. So I'd like quickly now just to have a very quick look at a simple example using the code list. This is based on a sample from the ESRS taxonomy, and you can see here a table that is broken down by, amongst other things, by the country. So we have these facts on the right-hand side, and if I click on one of these, you can see that we have the country axis or country dimension, and that's been tagged using the value France in the first two rows, and then for the second two rows, it's been tagged using Belgium. Now, if you actually look at the details, if you look at the raw XBRL, you'll find this has actually been tagged using the country code, the two-letter country code, FR or BE. But because we've used the taxonomy, we've got the benefits of the labels that are incorporated in it. So the viewer here is showing us the country name rather than the raw code. And of course, that's one of the benefits of using the taxonomy, is you get this additional metadata about the code. And I'll talk a little bit more about what's in that metadata in just a moment. So that's a very simple example of where the country code list is being used as a dimension value. As I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of using the taxonomy is that you can take advantage of the fact that we are tracking updates to the code lists. The list of currencies and countries in the world is not static. It does change from time to time, and ISO update their code lists to reflect these changes. I think typically there's a handful of changes each year to both code lists. We actively monitor these ISO announcements of these changes, and we have committed to updating the taxonomies in a timely manner. I think we commit to, our target is within 30 days of the ISO change coming into effect to update our taxonomies. Once within 30 days of the ISO announcements coming into effect, we will update our taxonomies to reflect these code lists. So if you adopt these taxonomies into your taxonomies, you can have confidence that updates will be available in a timely manner. And at this point, I'd like to describe the approach that we've taken to versioning the taxonomies. We actually released two different variants of both taxonomies, the current variant and the dated variant, and they take different approaches to incorporating updates from ISO. The current version is effectively a live taxonomy. We will update that. It has a fixed namespace and a fixed schema location, and we will make updates to it in place whenever there are changes to the code list. So if you import that into your taxonomy, you are guaranteed to always get the latest version of the taxonomy. This has advantages and disadvantages. The approach that we take, we never remove codes from the code list. Where codes are withdrawn, we leave them in the taxonomy, but we flag them as having been withdrawn. But there's no danger that codes will be removed and therefore invalidate existing reports. We only ever add code lists to the list. But by using the current version, you do always get the latest version, but it does mean you are not, as a taxonomy author, you are not in control of when those updates get incorporated. And if people are working with offline versions of your taxonomy, you may need to make sure that they update their copies of the taxonomy in order to make sure they've got the latest version. Some taxonomy authors prefer to be in full control of their taxonomies, and for that reason we also publish a dated version of the codeless taxonomies. These are given a unique namespace and a unique schema location, which means that as a taxonomy author, if you want to incorporate the update to the code list, you need to make a change to your taxonomy to incorporate the latest dated version of the taxonomy. So that means taxonomy authors are fully in control of exactly what is and isn't valid according to their taxonomy. But on the flip side, it means you need to make changes to your taxonomy in order to incorporate updates to the code list. We understand that different taxonomy authors have different views on the best way to tackle this, which is why we make these two different versions available, and you're free to choose whichever one you want to use. I mentioned earlier that one of the advantages of using the code lists is that you get some additional metadata about the codes, and I've shown here an example of a currency code. In fact, this is a currency code that's been withdrawn. So as part of the label, you can see that there's a date indicated of when the currency code was withdrawn. We also have a documentation label, which is drawn from information in the published ISO code list. And in fact, that's probably something I should emphasize, is that everything in these taxonomies is automatically drawn from the structured information that ISO publish. So the standard labels, this documentation labels about the geographic entity, all the other information is derived directly from information that ISO have published. We also include the numeric code for the currency, and you can see that we have some references that identify where which of the ISO code lists it came from. In the case of currencies, ISO publish two different lists. They call list 1 and list 3. List 1 is current currencies, list 3 is withdrawn currencies. So this reference tells you which list we've drawn it from. And in the case of withdrawn currencies, we also include in a structured format the month in which the currency was withdrawn or deprecated, and also a flag to indicate that it has been withdrawn. So this information is available to you if, for example, you want to write validation rules that ensure that only current currencies are used, or you want to check that the currency was valid at the point at which the report was created. You can use this metadata to drive those kind of validation rules. I should mention that the top two labels that you see here are available optionally. We have two different entry points for each taxonomy, one that provides just the codes and the structured metadata, and a second entry point which also includes the English language labels. So as a taxonomy author, you have a choice whether you include these labels or not. I think in general, people probably would want to include them, but the choice is there. When you're making use of the code lists, we provide, as part of the taxonomy, a domain member hierarchy that includes all of the codes. What that means is that's effectively a structured list that you can incorporate. So if you say from your fact value you want to permit any currency code or any currency code, you can simply reuse the hierarchy that we provide, and that will give you a complete list of all the currencies or all the countries. If you've got a reporting requirement that requires a subset of those codes, then you can create your own list of members, or domain member hierarchy as it's called in technical terms, which selects just the required codes from the taxonomy and associate that with your fact value or with your dimension. And there's information on how to do that in the architecture document that we've published to go with this taxonomies. So if you're interested in learning more about these taxonomies, or you just want to have a look at them, the taxonomies themselves are available from our taxonomy registry, taxonomies.xbrl.org. As I mentioned, we've also published an architecture document that gives information on how the taxonomies are structured. It also explains the versioning approach and how we are approaching updates to the taxonomy. In fact, we are already working on the first update. Within, I think, a week of us finalizing the taxonomy, we received our first announcement from ISO that a change to the currency list was being made with the addition of a new currency. So we are already working on an update to the taxonomy that will test that update process. We have got a separate guidance document on using these taxonomies, which is available on xbrl.org/guidance. And we've also created an announcements mailing list for these code list taxonomies. So if you are planning to incorporate these taxonomies into your own taxonomy and you want to be kept notified of when we're publishing updates to the code list taxonomies, you can subscribe to that list, and we will use that list to announce these changes. So that's a quick overview of these two taxonomies and how they can be used. I'd be very happy to take any questions that you may have on these two taxonomies.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the nice introduction and really good exposition. So I do have some questions, and we have as well in the FAQ panel some also. If you have any questions, please feel free to write your questions there in the FAQ panel. So my first question will be, what happened when a new ISO code is added? And maybe also there, the question from the panel would be as well, what is the licensing agreement with the ISO?
Yes, absolutely. So if you've been following the development process, I'll also tackle Lewis's question about the recommended status. If you've been following the development process of these taxonomies, you'll be aware that it's taken us a while to get them to the current status, which is recommended status. It was published, they were finalized, I think, last month. I forget the exact date. But yes, they are now at recommended status. And what that means is that the architecture of the taxonomy is finalized. But when we have updates to the code list, we don't propose to go through the full specification development cycle as we have with various drafts. Updates from ISO will be incorporated quickly into the taxonomies, and we'll go straight to a new version also at recommended status. We have a process for doing that. As I mentioned, when that happens, we will update the current version, the live version of the taxonomy, to add any new codes. Or in the case of codes being withdrawn, we'll simply update the metadata that indicates that they're now withdrawn. And we'll also produce a new dated version of the taxonomy that you can choose to incorporate. The licensing arrangements with ISO is a good question. The information that we've obtained is that the code lists are free to use, and that therefore it is within ISO's terms of use to publish taxonomies, which is effectively a translation into a different technical format. It is within their terms of use to publish them in this format, and there's certainly plenty of precedent for doing that in other formats. There are libraries in just about every language that provide codified versions, every programming language that is, that provide codified versions of these code lists. So there is no formal direct licensing agreement with ISO because our understanding is that there doesn't need to be one.
Thank you, Paul. How does the taxonomy address historic codes?
So we currently incorporate all codes that are listed in the ISO code list. This includes withdrawn codes. Where the codes are withdrawn, you have that flag that I showed in the references that indicates that the code is deprecated or withdrawn, and as and when future codes become withdrawn, the code, that flag will be added in an update to the taxonomy. There is an interesting property, which is that technically it is possible for codes to be reused in the future. I think ISO, in the case of currency codes, specify that they won't reuse a code within 50 years of it being withdrawn. So it's hopefully an academic problem, at least for the foreseeable future. Our policy is that we will never remove a code from the code list because we don't want to invalidate existing reports. If we ever did have the situation where a code was reused 50 years after it was withdrawn, we would at that point repurpose it, and hopefully there would be enough of a gap between the two different meanings that it wouldn't be a practical problem.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned two variants, the dated and the current, and for the taxonomy, but how does the taxonomy author choose between those?
I think this is will relate to the taxonomy author's existing update processes, and how important it is for them to get updates in a timely manner, or whether updates can be incorporated into their existing update cycle. And we've talked to different taxonomy authors, and we've encountered people who have very strong views in favour of both options. Some taxonomies strongly prefer one option, some taxonomies strongly prefer other options. But I think really it comes down to whether you want to be in complete control of when new codes become available, and therefore want to do an update to your taxonomy in order to enable those new codes, or whether you're happy for the list of codes that are permitted in your taxonomy to be a live code list that will get updated as and when new codes become available.
And the taxonomy includes English labels for codes in separate entry point. Do you plan to add additional language labels?
We don't plan to do that ourselves. The English language labels are there because that is what is provided by ISO, and therefore we've just directly incorporated those into our taxonomy. As I mentioned, one of the principles of these taxonomies is that we are providing a direct translation of what ISO give us. We don't want to take any view on the information there. We just provide a direct translation of the code lists into XBRL format. So there are English languages available, so we include them. We would be very happy to support the development of translations of these labels into other languages, and we'd be very happy to work with XBRL jurisdictions or other organizations who are keen to contribute such updates. We've described a process for doing this in the architecture document, and we'd certainly be very happy to facilitate publication of translations if anyone would like to help us develop those.
Sounds wonderful. So looking in the panel, we have more questions there. So one is there a plan to move? Now, is there a plan to move 3-letter codes for country taxonomies?
Not at present. We've incorporated, we've gone with the 2-letter codes for now. If people have a requirement for 3-letter codes, that's something we'd certainly like to hear the requirements for. We have an email address, which is taxonomies@xbrl.org. So if you have feedback and you'd like to discuss those requirements for adding 3-letter codes, please do drop us an email there, and we'll be very happy to discuss that.
Is there any plan to have? Sorry, Rita, yes.
Yeah. The 3-letter country codes are captured as an additional label in the taxonomy, so that might be helpful.
Yes, yes. So in the case of where the 3-letter codes and the 2-letter codes directly correspond, there is a label that tells you the corresponding 3-letter code. But my understanding is there are some 3-letter codes that don't have a corresponding 2-letter code, and we don't currently provide those in the code list.
Okay. Is there any plan to have subdivision codes taxonomies?
I think that I'd give the same answer there, which is there's not currently any plan to do that. If there's a requirement for that and a need for that, we'd be very happy to discuss how we could incorporate that. So please do contact us if that's something that's of value.
We have more questions. Will those taxonomy be incorporated into the SF taxonomies, ISRF and ISRS?
The ESRS taxonomy, I believe, already does incorporate these. I think they incorporated an earlier draft of them. I can't remember whether they've been updated to the recommended version, but yes, certainly the ESRS taxonomy is incorporating them. I can't speak for IFRS, but I think it is likely they will be incorporated where appropriate.
Okay, and then we have two more questions. Can federal agencies review and provide input for data being added to taxonomies?
We'd certainly be happy to hear feedback. As I mentioned, the approach that we've taken is to incorporate directly what we get from ISO, or what you can get from ISO, and what ISO publish. So one thing we're keen to avoid is detailed discussion of things like the labels or which codes should or shouldn't be incorporated. We want to defer to ISO on essentially all the content questions about what is and isn't on the code lists. So
we have one last
one. We're very happy to receive feedback, but our overriding principle is just to model what the ISO code list contains.
Last one, I think, is will the XBRL, I think it's XBRL, right, be able to provide separate labeled link bases with US label approved by US board and geographic names?
Yes, we would be very happy to work with you to provide essentially a translation of the labels. It would be an additional label bundle. We have a mechanism that's described in the architecture document for doing that. So if you're keen to provide those translated US labels, we'd be very happy to work with you on that.
Okay, I think that's it. We don't have any more questions. I have a last one. Where can you find the taxonomies?
Taxonomies.xbrl.org. And if you search then for country or currency, or in fact, I think just search for ISO, both of the taxonomies should come up.
Thank you. And I think we are on the top of our half hour for the webinar. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Paul, for being part of this webinar and explain everything. And yeah, so have a nice day, I would say.
Thank you. Goodbye.